Today is the 5th day of the June 86 retreat. There were quite a number of questions, but 3 stand out right now. One of the questions was, how can one really know oneself? I want to know myself, but how can I really know myself? Another question was, the way you talk about thought and memory makes one feel that it is inappropriate, divisive, separating all the time. Is there a time when thought is not divisive and memory is necessary, helpful? And one question was, is there a joy which is not dependent or has nothing to do with self-seeking, with selfishness, with the self? Is it possible that there is joy without the self? This first question, how can I know myself? Why does one want to know oneself? Is it because one thinks this is what is being done here? Seems to be the going thing, to talk about the self and our way of living. So being here, I might as well join in. Or has one found for oneself that our so habitual, so usual response of blaming others for difficulties that we ourselves encounter, looking for blame in our immediate environment or in our past environment, somehow does not take care of the difficulties and may not even be the right approach to them. That maybe something in ourselves creates difficulties, confusions, divisions, feeling of isolation and separation. And if that is so, if one has had glimpses of that, can one see how one creates this? When, how it comes up, how it operates, what the consequences of our actions are. And whether there can be a change in that. I think all of us have been aware or are aware of the mechanicalness and compulsiveness of our reactions, how quickly we respond and react to something, somebody, without even having premeditated that. There is the response to something that was said to us or done to us. And afterwards one may realize I didn't even feel like that. I didn't even feel like saying that. And yet there it was. And of course, had consequences. Every response, every reaction brings a counter-reaction from the people around us with whom we interrelate. And one becomes aware of the straitjacket of these automatic responses and reactions. It begins to wonder, where do they come from? How does it happen? Why does it happen? One may have had insight into the self-image. We've talked about it a lot. How there's constant maintenance and repair of the self-image. Not just maintenance and repair, but wanting it to be reconfirmed through others. We're looking for that in others, to reconfirm or affirm the image we have of ourselves, so that we can feel at ease, happy, loved, approved of. And yet this need is insatiable because of the very nature of the image. The image is a totally fragile thought. And one may wonder whether this is all one is. Whole accumulation of fragile thoughts and images, with all that these thoughts and images bring out in the body, in the emotions. The fears and angers, jealousy, envy, ambition to be better, to compete, to get on the top, or the fear of failure, all connected with the image of oneself. The question was, how am I to know myself? If one reflects upon how we were raised, almost from the day we were born, sometimes from the day before we were born, our parents, and parents are just representative of the society in which we live, had ideas of how to raise us, hopes for how we would turn out, what we would be doing, wanting us to be good, not wanting us to be bad. And I'm just putting it very simply. All kind of other wants for children, how they should be fulfilling the needs, unfulfilled needs of their parents. And at a certain age, after hearing often enough what is good and what is bad, a child introjects these values into himself or herself, either following them, trying to be as one feels one ought to be, and trying to suppress what one believes now is bad and evil, or rebelling against these standards and reversing it, just doing exactly what the parents say is bad, and getting a different identity from that. But whether there's the obedience or the rebellion, we have all learned to behave according to patterns which have been laid out for us by our parents, by our schools, graduate school. Someone told me once, who went to medical school, that medical school is not just acquisition of knowledge and information, it is a socialization process. Learning to become somebody, a doctor, with certain quite fixed behavior patterns. Anyone who has been in spiritual training knows that there too is a socialization process in action where one conforms to behavior patterns, becoming a certain type which is looked favorably upon. In any group we find ourselves, any segment of society, there are required or admired behavior patterns. And having this unlimited capacity for imitation, we imitate and become the person that we feel we ought to become, or we rebel against it, then adopting another opposite behavior pattern. But a pattern it is. In following behavior patterns, can one know who one is apart from this conditioning? Will one even be aware of the fact that one is conditioned? How does one begin to become aware of that? If we're not aware of it, we carry on in the pattern. Colliding with people that have other different behavior patterns. Feeling superior in ours or inferior in ours. Switching over to another one. To get rid of one that is felt inadequate or painful or restricting. There was this whole hippie movement which was hoped to be a freedom from conditioning, from imposed accepted norms, but it became a pattern all its own. Maybe it was that from the very outset. So how does one become aware of the fact that one is conditioned? We did mention the frustration one may feel at reacting so fast and realizing later one hasn't wanted to react this way and beginning to wonder why. And beginning to feel the constriction, the limitation, the confinement of our automatic responses. I think in this context, it becomes quite clear what we talked about recently, the difference between a concentration practice and awareness. If one wanting to find out who one is begins to concentrate on something, concentrate the mind, hoping that through this concentration eventually there will be clarity, enlightenment, understanding of who one is. This whole process of concentrating excludes becoming aware of what is actually happening from moment to moment. It is very usable as a repressive tool to repress fear, anger, envy, or ignore it. Using the concentration to attain an ideal state that is not a reality, that is a thought that has come out of what one has heard or been told or read. But the question still remains, doesn't it? How can one be aware? How can one be aware of oneself? The question was, how can I know myself? So maybe we'll talk a little bit about the way the word know is usually used. If one means by knowing oneself having a remembered and to be remembered as one goes knowledge about one's personality traits, that is in the realm of thinking and remembering. One remembers many, many incidents of one's past life. What happened that made one shy, or what happened that made one aggressive. And this knowledge about oneself is carried around. It is a body. We say that, a body of knowledge about oneself. If one comes upon an incident, one will immediately interpret it in terms of what one knows, or ask someone else to interpret for one. What does this do to? What was it? What were its causes? Accumulating bits of information about oneself as one lives. Because never reaching the end of it. There's no end to it. There's no end to the incidents of our past. They're probably infinite. Because they do include the incidents in the lives of our parents and the society that they lived and grew up in, and their parents, and the culture, the history, all the events of all of our past. And no matter how well one remembers and knows about oneself, and one can tell it to somebody, expose one's personality and telling about one's personality traits, hang-ups, habits, idiosyncrasies, so forth and so forth. That does not mean that one actually sees it as it happens. It's a completely different thing to see a response as it happens. Not afterwards analyze, well, I responded because such and such a reason, and giving an elaborate history of one's past. We did say that a response comes out so quickly that it may seem impossible to see it as it comes up. No, I don't think it's impossible to see it as it comes up. Once it's out. One has said something. But one can still hear the sound of the words. One can still feel the tensions throughout the body that accompany that response. But one can also see the urgency to make that response as one is challenged by someone. When there is attention. When there's no attention, then there is the automatic stimulus, response, reaction, and counter-reaction. It all runs on very smooth, oiled grooves. So, is it possible to be aware of a response forming, no matter what the speed may be? If there's awareness, the speed doesn't matter. And if that awareness is not there, we continue in the same pattern. Not only do we continue in the same pattern, but with every new response, that response is strengthened, has a little bit more odds of occurring again, because it has been more ingrained in the brain, in the connections. So is it possible to see as one goes? Learning about oneself, not piling up memories and knowledge, but seeing how one reacts and responds as one lives together. That can only take place if one is not thoroughly attached to the ideas of how one should behave, how one should act, and how we've been raised. We talked about this at the beginning. Having internalized all these values of right and wrong, what is a right emotion, what is a wrong emotion. So one has to see that too. And question it. Not throw it overboard, but question it and look. And look and question. All of our so ingrained convictions of what is right and wrong behavior, right and wrong response. If we feel that to be angry or to be envious or jealous is wrong, immoral, and one has an image of being a person who is not envious or jealous or angry, then one will not see. The vision is one is blind, is blinded. So does it become apparent from all of this how important it is to see the images that we have of ourselves and to question them again and again and again? Not being frustrated about its coming up again, but seeing it. Frustration is irrelevant, is out of place. It may come up. And then one sees that too. But the images have to be seen and put aside so that we can see what we actually are. Not from knowledge about a human being, but from the actuality of living in this moment with awareness, openness, and not afraid of seeing what's there. Not afraid to touch and be in contact, in intimate contact with what is there in a human being. What has been so repressed or suppressed through conforming to norms of behavior. And yet it's there once the inquiry and questioning cracks these standards and norms, perforates them, so there's some air getting underneath. Air and light. Sitting in a retreat like this cracking and perforating of the layers of norms and images happens. And stuff may surface that one is amazed was ever there. Sometimes one wonders, what am I to do with this? One is not to do anything with it. What is there to do about it but to see it? Without norms of behavior, without standards and images to compare it with, leaving that out of the way. That distorts the vision. It clouds the light. Just to let it be there, where the cover is removed. Not immediately thinking, which is our another habitual response. This is my behavior. It doesn't belong to anybody. It's human conditioning, or the results of human repression. We've all done it to ourselves. We know where to begin and where to end. We all share in all of these emotions. They're not mine or yours. That really helps in looking at it. To realize that. Because if one feels this is mine, one wants to quickly cover it up again. I'm not like that. Can one see that when it happens? Can one see anything that happens? Has an incredible, what shall I say? I almost said a joyful energy in that. In uncovering and seeing and discovering. If one is not hemmed in by images of what one should be like. It's like if one walks in the forest and there's this layer of half-rotten leaves, not just from the last fall, maybe from the fall before. If one scrapes at it and there's some fresh green underneath. Only in the forest this green would have come through anyways. Don't know how, but it does. Whereas with our tight lid of control, well, things come up too, in distorted ways, through the back door. You cannot keep anger or envy or jealousy under cover. It does come up, even if we don't want it to come up. And to look at it freely and not narrowly, not zeroing in on it. To let it be there along with the 10,000 things that are inside and out. That awareness being spacious and quiet. Quiet meaning not immediately the thought, what am I going to do about it? How can I get rid of it? What must I do to change it? That's no longer awareness. That's habitual thought again. habitual reaction, can it be seen and end? Some people have said to me, actually the reason I'm here, and maybe other people are here, whether we acknowledge it or not, or you acknowledge it or not, is to get kensho, which is a Japanese word which means translated to see into the nature. In the mind, through the stories one has read, it is associated with a liberating experience which will change us. And one wants that experience to take care of one's difficulties. But see the nature, or seeing into the true nature of oneself, this is what this means in translation. The true nature of us may be the seeing. They may be not two different things, not seeing into something. But seeing without our whole conditioned background. The whole conditioned background being disconnected from this instant of seeing. Seeing free from that. And this happens to people whether they are training in a spiritual discipline or not. Happens to people who've never heard of such a thing. But then it is so quickly covered up by wanting to keep it, wanting to have it back, making a memory out of it, or trying to fit it into one's particular religious tradition. Explaining how this all explains the holy books or scriptures. And the conditioning is at work again. But seeing has nothing to do with tradition. It is free from tradition. It's what is there. The important thing not being the nature that one sees, but that there's seeing. And when it's not known in terms of what one knows and what one cherishes or hates or associates with immediately, when that is not happening, when it's just plain seeing, awareness, call it what you will, then what is revealed changes. Anger does not maintain itself, it runs its physical course. Or envy or jealousy. When it's really seen. When they're seeing, let's put it this way. Because in seeing there is no me that wants something out of the seeing. There's no me. that is afraid of what is seen. So how can anger or envy or jealousy maintain itself? Because that's closely connected with me, my possessions, or what others possess, what I should have or don't want to lose. All the fears emanating from this me, which is image and thought and idea. We've been into that yesterday and the before. To see how quickly we become involved in the content of what we're becoming aware of, rather than staying with the awareness. There was this question of whether there is joy when there is no self, no selfishness or self-centeredness. Which is the same as asking, can there be or will there be any joy if I'm not actively seeking it, going out after it? We went into a question yesterday or the day before, someone saying, I had a glimpse of this non-division, this absence of self, but I'm not so sure I want it. Because I'm concerned that if there's no self, there will be no more joy. What is the joy that we tremble for, that we're afraid of losing? At this moment, we can ask that and look at it. At this moment, what is the joy that we are? And I think this question is can easily be each one of our question of each one of us. What is the joy that we are afraid of losing, or that will not continue when there's no self? Right this moment we'd have to think of it, wouldn't we? Think of pleasurable experience we had or have had repeatedly in the past. And this is a memory right now. That is clear, isn't it? Although thinking of a pleasurable experience can, through association, connections between brain and body elicit pleasurable sensations. The memory of a past pleasure can produce pleasurable sensations in the body. Is one afraid of losing that? By seeing that it's memory, and by seeing that memory is away from what is here actually happening right now, which may be quite dull, there may be no particularly pleasurable physical sensation. Is one also afraid that one may not anticipate future pleasures? And does one realize what a high proportion of one's pleasures are of this nature, of remembering past pleasures and looking forward to future ones, and allowing this mechanism of a thought triggering feelings and sensations to give us pleasure. It's clear, isn't it, right now, because we can do it right now, that in entering upon the pleasure trip or the pleasure channel, we're not here, not aware of sounds of the birds or the air, even maybe the pain in the body may not be felt. The movies are taking over, the absorption in the movies. And movie is not a bad metaphor, because it's a dark room in which there is something going on, some projection, a film. Does one also realize that the same mechanism is working when we're afraid of what happened in the past, that it may come again in the future? Or it may not happen in the past, but we can imagine it, a nuclear attack, the nuclear winter or whatever it is called. Getting cancer, dying, through the same associative mechanism, a thought triggering fearful, sad, or angry feelings throughout the body. And does one get a feeling for it that these go hand in hand? One can't have one without the other. It's the same process involved whether we please ourselves or we frighten ourselves in thought, in fantasy. And most of our fears, as we pointed out very thoroughly the other day, most of our fears, or maybe all of our fears, happen in thought. Past thought or thought about the future. But we still haven't answered the question whether there can be joy first of all, which is not associated with image and thought. Can one go out and seek joy because one has to conceive of a joyful event? So one conceives of one and then one does it. One climbs a mountain. Just takes a walk or does some white water canoeing. This is intense pleasure for some people. In climbing the mountain, or the view, or the wildflowers, seeing the wildflowers, or the clear creeks across the road, along the road, the path. To really see that, smell it, feel it, be that. No self is needed. On the contrary, it's a hindrance. Do you see that? If it becomes a memory, and while sitting and feels so dull and unexciting, one brings up that memory, then the process is going on that we just described, using a memory to create pleasure, but it's not that hike itself. That is finished. And that's not the memory of it. Actually, one may seek pleasure or joy in a mountain trip and find the thing turns out dismal. Nothing goes right. It's raining. The people with whom one is on the climbing party or hiking party don't get along with each other. Oh, one is maybe constantly talking. So just because we seek a joyful experience does not mean we're going to get it. I think joy happens when we don't seek it. When we haven't planned it all out. One person said in a meeting, I don't want anymore the joy and not being aware, the joy and being unaware. I'd rather have this joy of awareness. It was not just said glibly, it was a realization of how most of what we call our joys and pleasures, there is no awareness. One is attached to something, to the satisfaction one wants to get from it, to the image of oneself getting pleasure, or to the image of the other. It's something to look at for oneself. Deeply. the moment one asks oneself, am I having joy right now? Is there joy right now? It's already finished. Because a very narrow process is running, and the openness and freedom of being without any separation is gone. But if one asks, how can I get that openness and freedom of no separation? The answer is, I don't know. There is no one to get it. It happens on its own. It comes by itself. When we're not out after it. We will end here for today.